Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. President Trump's policies and their effect on Pennsylvania is our topic today. First, we're joined by John Cole from the PA Capitol Star. Welcome, John.
Good morning, Larry. Thanks for having me on.
You filed a story about a PA lawmaker being elected to a position within the National Democratic Party. Tell us about that.
That's correct, Larry. So State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, a Democrat who represents the 181st District in Philadelphia, that's particularly parts of North Philly. He ran for one of the multiple DNC vice chair positions. So after this election, the National Party elected a new slate of leaders. So that includes a national chair and then 3 vice chairs. There were over a dozen or so candidates running for the vice chair position. State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta was one of them, and he was elected in that new slate.
John, what is Kenyatta expected to do as vice chair?
It's a very good question. During our conversation, I asked, what is your role in as a vice chair? And he mentioned, again, the goal of the DNC is essentially to help get Democrats elected up and down the ballot. Now, of course, one of the things I wanted to make sure, and I asked him, does this interfere with your day job as a state legislator? And he said, no, he believes his job as a state legislator informs him. He believes those are the kind of, that kind of experience will help him as he goes to, for messaging, as he goes to different states. Even though we know 2024 was a very big election with the president and multiple statewide row offices and such in Pennsylvania and beyond, there are important races in 2025, and we talked about that. And he said it's going to be his job to make sure that Democrats win those important races where, there's a gubernatorial race in Virginia. There's a race in New Jersey. There are state legislator races. Heck, even in our own backyard in Pennsylvania here, the state house will have a special election in just a few weeks, as will the state Senate. And the Democrats only have that 1-seat majority in the state house. So that's why they're really focused on that. Then, of course, there's state Supreme Court retention races in Pennsylvania. And I think there's one state Supreme Court open seat in Wisconsin. So there's a bevy of races nationwide. But when they have time, we will try to, again, campaign for those candidates when they see fit.
John, just briefly, tell us about the process that got Kenyatta elected to this position.
Sure. So Democrats convened a few weeks ago. I believe it was February 1st, to be exact. The National Committee got together, and again, there's delegates from across the whole country. Just to emphasize to the audience, this wasn't just Pennsylvania-centric. This did not take place in the Commonwealth. But again, they gathered to elect, again, a new chair and vice chair. Voting members that are delegates of the Democratic National Party were there to select those people up and down, again, in this new slate of leadership.
And I'm curious, John, what did Kenyatta have to do in order to get support for this position?
Good question. I mean, so Representative Kenyatta has been a lawmaker in Pennsylvania since 2018. But even though he's a state representative, he has made multiple runs for statewide office. So I think his name recognition has gone up in the past few years. In 2022, he ran for U.S. Senate unsuccessfully, but he was one of the candidates in that race where John Fetterman ended up winning that primary. And then he was also a candidate for Auditor General last year as a Democrat. He won the Democratic primary there, but lost in the general election to Auditor General Tim DeFord. But beyond that, he was very active on the campaign trail in 2020 and 2024. When President Joe Biden ran in 2020, Representative Kenyatta was a very outspoken supporter of Biden early on in that primary. So Representative Kenyatta, again, is no stranger to the campaign trail, whether that's campaigning in Pennsylvania and beyond. I mean, I've seen Representative Kenyatta go to other states like South Carolina and early voting states. So he is someone who is not afraid to go out on the campaign trail, which I think is part of the reason he did seek this position.
John, included in your story was a poll that showed an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party. What's in Kenyatta's power to change that as far as he's concerned?
That's an excellent question. That's one of the questions, Larry, I posed to Representative Kenyatta, that right now, again, there was a Quinnipiac University survey, is the one you're citing. 57% of registered voters have an unfavorable view of the party. That's the highest since they started asking that question in 2008. And I wanted to ask Representative Kenyatta, like, what can you do about that? And I think he made the case to me. He said that he believes Democrats, the next 4 years can't be, apologizing for being a Democrat. He wants them essentially not to be shy. He believes that, be proud of being the party of unions, the party of working people. And it sounds like he wants Democrats to not be quiet during the next 4 years, during the second term of President Donald Trump's.
John, when you talked to Kenyatta, did you find out his opinion on what the takeaway was for him personally after the Democrats lost the White House last November?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think that's all the question all of us reporters have, the Democrats. And I think the one thing that we've seen is pretty consistent are Democrats, they don't want to talk about 2024, I guess, anymore. Because when I asked him specifically, I'm like, why do you think Republicans have more success? He told me, look, I'm vice chair of this party, not so we can play Monday morning quarterback. They're trying to look forward to important elections this year. But I think there are many in the party that are still grappling with the losses that the national party had in 2024, but he made the case that they're moving forward and they're laser focused on the race in 2025. But Larry, I'm telling you, there's many pundits, reporters, and I think Democrats alike that are wondering what they can do to make sure, and for their perspective, they don't want to recreate what happened in 2024.
So, John, as far as Kenyatta is concerned, he's able to handle his duties day to day for being a PA legislator, and after all, he's run for statewide office before unsuccessfully.
That's correct. Again, Representative Kenyatta is only in his mid-30s. So, but even though at that young age, again, he's been in the state house. He first won that seat in 2018. He's made multiple runs for statewide office. And again, President Joe Biden, he was an early supporter of his. Representative Kenyatta, I forgot to mention this too. He also spoke on the DNC stage in Chicago this past year as well. So, I mean, he's gotten some of the national recognition. He's been someone who is certainly not afraid, I guess, of of speaking to reporters and being the limelight in these campaigns. So again, I think this particular role, I think will be interesting to see that should Democrats have success this year, I think people will look back to say, okay, what were the changes the Democratic Party made and what did Representative Kenyatta do for that conversation? Because it's not just him. Again, there's 3 vice chairs and there's a new DNC chair in Ken Martin, who previously led the Minnesota Democratic Party.
Thank you, John Cole from the PA Capitol Star. More of the PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Fletcher McClellan from Elizabethtown College. He's Professor Emeritus of Political Science. And Thomas Baldino from Wilkes University, also Professor Emeritus of Political Science. Welcome to our program, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
On which policies has President Trump focused his energy since he took office last month? Let's start with you, Fletcher.
Well, he's been busy. It's a really aggressive use of presidential power, something we haven't seen for quite some time. But he's issued, of course, dozens of executive orders. He's appointed, as presidents are given the power to do, he's appointed cabinet people, sub-cabinet people. He's replaced many Biden appointees. He's put in loyalists everywhere, some of them controversial, such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. Almost all of them have been confirmed or are in the process. His associate Elon Musk, the gazillionaire, is heading the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, and he's been busy. He and his teen and 20-something cohort have been penetrating the cyber networks of federal agencies, and with that, they've been attempting to for one thing, they've attempted to reduce the federal workforce. They handed out buyout packages. They've attempted to fire civil servants, especially those on probation. They've also tried to get rid of independent agency commissioners. They've attempted to freeze trillions of dollars of federal grants and loans. A lot of that has been blocked by the courts. They've attempted to shut down agencies, the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, among others, talked about devolving or somehow getting rid of the U.S. Department of Education, talked about privatization of federal agencies. So in essence, he's been trying to take total control of the federal executive branch and implementation of government policy. He's challenged the interpretations of the law, for example, protection of transgender rights. He's challenged laws passed by Congress, the Impoundment Act, the Civil Service Protection. He's even challenged the Constitution. He denies that there is any such thing as birthright citizenship, which is in the plain text of the 14th Amendment. He's claimed very broad powers over the government, and recently he tweeted that if a leader is doing it to protect his country, then he doesn't break the law if it's in the name of protecting the country. So it's pretty stunning.
Tom, what do you think? Fletcher has given us quite a few items to work with here. He said that the president's been very aggressive in the first month of his presidency.
Oh, absolutely. Comparing his first administration to this one, the first one took a year or two to get out of the gate, using the racehorse metaphor. This one, he was out of the gate literally on day one, signing executive orders as if they were, blank checks. And so Fletcher did a fine job laying out the full range of things that Trump has been involved in. I would just add that he seemed to foreground immigration reform. Basically attacking, and if you will, Canada and Mexico as significant contributors to the flow of immigrants into the country, and particularly illegal drugs, when in fact neither country is particularly at fault for contributing to those drugs coming into the country, and especially fentanyl, which mostly comes in through legal means, if you will. But nonetheless, he went after them, and he's also, as Fletcher mentioned, going after the bureaucracy in an effort to shrink the size of the federal government. And he's doing it as though he's burrowing into the agencies and hollowing them out, rather than asking Congress to eliminate departments that Congress constitutionally has the power to create, right? So if you burrow it out and leave nothing inside, essentially you've removed the department. And while Trump isn't doing that himself, he has empowered Musk, again, as Fletcher mentioned, with his Doge operation to carry out those operations. And it's like in medieval terms, you bring in a sapper team to go under the walls of a fortress and blow it up, and then the walls come down. And that's basically what Doge is. It's a sapper team going into these departments and bringing them down. Right? It's an amazing operation. And none of this is a surprise because it was all laid out in the Project 2025 handbook. Right? So anyone who did not read that, and I didn't recommend anyone read it, although I tried to get through it, it was very detailed, over close to 900 pages. And those people who wrote it, many of them are now working either directly in the White House or in various departments throughout the federal government.
Well, gentlemen, let's try to take some of these events we've been talking about that have been taking place within the Trump administration and connect them with Pennsylvania. Now, I understand there is a dispute between our governor and President Trump over billions in federal funds. What's going on there? Can you tell us, Fletcher?
Yes, the governor, along with attorney generals and governors from 20-some states, mainly controlled by Democrats, has sued the Trump administration. Trump has attempted, or is not, he's not paying out grants to states, especially those that were connected with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Programs, grants dealing with combating climate change. Governor Shapiro's lawsuit specifically mentions grants to help take care of abandoned coal mines, to cap abandoned drilling sites, oil and gas drilling sites, efforts to help poor people refit their homes to make them more energy efficient. Mainly those kinds of grants and loans that deal with the climate as he's been targeting. And Governor Shapiro is arguing that these are programs authorized by Congress. The president should spend them as directed. He's talking mainly about $2 billion here. He said in the out years, it could be over $5 billion that is at risk, and he wants the courts to order the president to spend the money.
And as far as the Trump administration is concerned, why is the federal government withholding funds that Pennsylvania is entitled to?
Want me to take that
Go
one?
ahead.
Please do, Tom.
Yeah, so it's because Trump says he can. And he wants to shrink the size of the federal deficit. And that's a thing that Musk is intent on doing. He swore he was going to take the budget deficit, reduce it by $2 trillion. Previous administrations of both parties have attempted to shrink the deficit, and the only one to really do it was Bill Clinton. He left office with a smaller federal deficit and actually a surplus in the annual budget, which happened for 2 years, as last year and then the first year of the Trump administration. But shrinking the size of the federal deficit and the budget is essential for Trump to accomplish, because at the same time he's trying to do that, he wants to continue the large tax cut that he passed in his first administration, which, as many economists will tell you, benefited the top 1% of the population, and the rest got something, but not nearly as much as the top 1%. So shrinking the size of the deficit, shrinking the national debt, and shrinking the size of the annual deficit are two important goals. But to do that, you've got to take money from various places. And as Fletcher mentioned, and as you mentioned, it's Shapiro bringing this suit, and he's trying to recoup about $2.5 billion for this fiscal year. And Shapiro was bringing it because we have a Republican attorney general who would not join the suit of the other 20 some odd states that are bringing the same kind of suit to get money for their states. As I discovered in digging around and also in reading, giving full disclosure or attribution, the Philadelphia Inquirer did a couple of pieces listing where the money is coming from in terms of the losses to the states. State research universities, and they're run the gamut in terms of size, from Penn Town to Geisinger Health System, which does do some research. The state's going to lose approximately $367 million in research funding. And then various departments, beginning with our Department of Environmental Protection, 83% of its budget comes from the federal government. Total money in that budget for DEP is about $4 billion, $4 million, and the federal dollars count for 3.3 million.
Well, gentlemen, let's go ahead, Fletcher.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that aside from trying to shrink the federal government, I mean, this is in line with the president's priorities. He is a climate skeptic, let's call it that, and wants to go full bore into production of fossil fuels, and doesn't want anything that would, handicap the industry. He's going to tone down environmental protection enforcement in order to unleash the fossil fuel industry. And this is also kind of a political project. He's trying to negate the Biden legacy. These were, the major legislative achievements: the inflation reduction, the infrastructure jobs, trillions of dollars that were enacted, and he's trying to cancel that.
Now back to the lawsuit that's being filed by Governor Josh Shapiro against the Trump administration. The governor says that President Trump is ignoring an order from federal court to unfreeze these funds that Pennsylvania needs. So I ask you, and you're both political science professors, what are the consequences of ignoring a court ruling like this?
Oh, some constitutional scholars will say that we will have then encountered a real constitutional crisis. That is to say, when a president ignores an order from the courts, and since the courts don't have, as Andrew Jackson once said, it doesn't have its own army, who then is left to enforce a court order? It's expected to be the executive. What would then happen? We've never quite encountered anything like that. Right? We came close with Nixon when Nixon was ordered to turn over the tapes, the Watergate tapes, the recordings in the White House. He eventually did so, right? So we avoided that constitutional crisis. But, and the other near constitutional crisis during his administration was his attempt to impound funds, stop spending money. And in response to that, Congress passed in 1974 the Budget and Impoundment Control Act, which is operative today, which requires that the president tell the Congress he's not going to spend this money. And then under the impoundment portion of that act, Congress must vote to approve the impoundment. That is to say, the cessation of spending the money. But Congress hasn't done that in this instance. So
Tom has this exactly right. I mean, we would be entering, and some say we are now, have entered a constitutional crisis. The Nixon attempt to impound funds, to zero out programs by not spending, for example, a number of war and poverty programs, was checked. But, back then, Congress was controlled by the Democrats. The press was far more adversarial. We're now getting into the midst of Watergate. There was a different kind of culture regarding presidents and not being above the law. We have different circumstances now. What's interesting is a lot of this, and Tom pointed this out earlier, a lot of this unilateral power is being exercised by the president while his party controls Congress and he controls his party. He could accomplish much of this by going through the regular legislative process. Now, he doesn't trust it. That could be one explanation. He has very narrow majorities, especially in the House. There is a potential filibuster in the Senate, for example, on some items. But he's going full speed ahead, even though his party controls Congress. And, that's the missing link here. You don't have a constitutional crisis. You don't have a runaway presidency unless you have an invisible Congress. And since very few people in Congress, especially within his party, are challenging him, Congress is not right now challenging the president's assertion of power over the budget.
Gentlemen, last question on this subject, and let's again consider the lawsuit that Governor Josh Shapiro has filed against the president about funds being frozen. So is there a workaround for Governor Shapiro as far while his lawsuit is pending against the president?
Well, he could tap into the state's rainy day fund, which his budget proposal already is requesting, but absent the release of federal funds, the only thing that's left for the governor to do is actually cut the programs that are being underfunded. And that would be a very painful process for not just the environmental segment, because there's a big chunk of this that is really targeted at the environmental area, but also for the military veterans, emergency management, drug and alcohol issues, and the health sector. So we will all feel the pinch of that in one way, shape, or form.
Fletcher, what do you think? Is it time for the governor to start considering cutting programs while these federal funds are frozen?
Well, that's certainly an option, and I imagine he's going to, be very selective in that process, but we've just begun the budget process in Pennsylvania. He submitted his budget just 2 weeks ago. And there are going to be all kinds of, dimensional, negotiations going on. He has a program that he wants to advance. Republicans in the Senate basically don't want him to go that far. They're challenging his use of his spending priorities. So, to sort of go down the road of cuts. I mean, and Tom, you have the figures. I mean, about how much of the Pennsylvania's budget is wrapped up in federal funds, and we're not just talking about small grants here. We're potentially talking about Medicaid, which is the big kahuna of federal state spending programs. So this really complicates the picture, and not only with the governor, but the state legislators would also be very reluctant to go down that road.
Before,
If I,
go ahead, Tom.
just to put this in the full context, Shapiro's suit is based on a decision by a district court judge, right? So the Trump administration is appealing not only the decision by the Rhode Island judge and the Massachusetts judge about cutting spending, impounding funds, but Trump is the strategy here is to get one of these cases to the Supreme Court, which is, 6 of the judges are conservative and 3 of whom were appointed by Trump. So the gamble on Trump's part is when it gets to the court, these things will be upheld by the court, in which case we don't have a constitutional crisis. The real constitutional crisis happens, or an absolute constitutional crisis happens if the Supreme Court upholds the lower court judges' decisions, okay? So if I were Shapiro, I would hold off actually implementing any cuts to Pennsylvania programs, because there's maybe not a 50-50 chance, maybe it's a 60-40 chance that the court rules in favor of Trump, okay? But still, the odds aren't great, but they're better than like 100% in favor of Trump. So, and it may take until, the early spring before the court actually gets around to handling all these cases, although I've read that there are members of the court that want to expedite this. So,
gentlemen, thank you very much.
Yep.
I'm going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at program notes for here on PCN. A focus on aging adults looks at the possible impact of the governor's new budget proposal on Pennsylvania's seniors. Our guests will be the State Secretary of Aging, Jason Kavulich, and the State Director of AARP of Pennsylvania, Bill Johnston Walsh. This program airs Wednesday at 7 p.m. On the Issues considers charter school accountability with the Executive Director of the Education Voters of Pennsylvania, Susan Spica. She'll join us on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Then right after that, we'll explore the governor's proposal to close 2 prisons in Pennsylvania. The guest will be the president of the PA State Corrections Officers Association, John Eckenrode. He'll be here Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. State budget hearings continue here on PCN. The PA House Appropriations Committee will hear testimony from the PA State System of Higher Education and the PA Higher Education Assistance Agency, and that hearing will start Thursday live at 10 a.m. Then the state-related universities explain their funding requirements to the House Appropriations Committee on Thursday. That's live at 1 p.m. To find out more about state budget hearings here on PCN, go to pcntv.com. On Journalist Roundtable this week, our guests will be Charlie Thompson from Penn Live and the Patriot News, John Finnerty from Capitol Wire, and Stephen Caruso from Spotlight PA. They'll be here on Thursday at 7 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free of charge on the internet. Go to pcntv.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, Visit PCNTV.com. All right, we're talking about the impact of President Trump's policies on Pennsylvania. Now, gentlemen, let's switch over to immigration. And before we consider any actions the president has taken with respect to immigration, let's look back a few months and just consider what he said about immigration on the campaign trail. What was the message he was getting through Fletcher, please?
Well, he claims that we've been invaded, and indeed by immigrants, especially from south of the border. Although he's also targeting his latest efforts, he's also talking about immigration coming from Canada and other parts. And indeed, there have been millions of immigrants, migrants who have come to this country, even, of course, during his first term. He's attempted to beef up enforcement of immigration forces, to fast track immigration, that is immigration deportation. He wants to take what he says are the most dangerous illegal immigrants and put them in Guantanamo. He is really trying to cancel or severely limit the asylum program through which people can legally enter the United States if they can demonstrate that they are in danger in their own countries. As Tom said, I think this is sort of the main, domestic and foreign initiative of his administration. It's going to have really a serious impact on Pennsylvania, not only on the workforce, if we're talking about agricultural workers, but legal immigrants as well. I note, for example, in Lancaster County, which prides itself on being a welcoming place for legal immigrants and has been recognized all over the world for refugee settlement. Church World Service, which helps to place legal immigrants in homes in the county and beyond, they're laying off workers. They can't really perform their functions. You've got authorities like school boards that have to decide whether or not ICE officers can enter and enforce laws. You've got cities that are sanctuary cities or welcoming centers such as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Allentown, that have declared that they're not going to cooperate, or at least actively, with ICE authorities. One way or another, whether you're a consumer, looking for fresh and cheap produce, or whether you have people who themselves have questionable or even legal citizenship status, people are going to be affected.
Well, Tom, let me put this question to you. How much actual arresting of illegal immigrants with a criminal history has taken place?
Good point, right? I also want to just frame this just a little differently. Trump campaigned on going after illegal immigrants. That had bipartisan support, and I think that helped him win over many Democrats. But the better way of understanding this is, think about the immigration population as undocumented and documented, right? There are people who came into the country illegally and are undocumented. Some of them, and according to statistics, they are criminals, but not a large percentage, right? No one disputes that undocumented criminals shouldn't be removed, okay? The undocumented who are not criminals they do perform many jobs that American citizens who are not foreign don't want to do. And much of that is in the fields, working on farms. Some of them are in chicken, poultry factories, or doing manual labor. I have a good friend who lives in Texas half the time now, and he tells me that construction is going to dry up there because most of the people who work building homes are not either undocumented and not criminals, or they're documented. And Trump is also going after the documented folks, right? And when he goes after the birthright citizenship provision of the 14th Amendment, he's going to take out a whole other segment of people who are here legally, documented.
They're citizens.
They're citizens, right? Which clearly is unconstitutional, but we'll wait to see how that plays out in the courts. So, to your question, there's going to be a significant impact on Pennsylvania, as Fletcher described, and I don't think Pennsylvanians fully appreciate the impact that removing people who are here as either undocumented and not criminal, but documented, who are doing jobs. And now to the real question, or the original question, there really haven't been that many arrests in our state, right? Trump does a great job in terms of publicizing his accomplishments. And so when the ICE teams went out and raided places in Chicago and New York, there was an effort to do one in Philly. Homeland Security Secretary Noem was there, and Dr. Phil was on one raid. That's great for drawing attention to it. But in terms of actual numbers, at one point, Trump's numbers on a daily basis were less than Biden's when Biden was in office, right? Now, then Trump issued an order, actually a quota. He wanted more people, and he informed the ICE teams, you have to pick up at least 1,500 people a week or something. We'll see how that plays out. But right now, there are raids being conducted in Pennsylvania, but they haven't generated the big numbers that Trump would like to see.
Yeah, and when you put a quota, basically you're telling ICE, I don't care, basically who it is or what their status is. You're giving them license to just pick up anyone of any who looks different or has any kind of suspicious characteristics, just to fulfill quotas.
Well, gentlemen, allow me to jump ahead in our discussion about immigration enforcement. And let's consider what are the prospects of a labor shortage that will raise prices even higher at the supermarket.
That's definitely a possibility. And that's not just a function of immigration cracking down on people who are here undocumented, but also on the tariffs, right? We bring in lots of fresh fruits and vegetables from Mexico. And if the tariffs go on to the goods coming in from Europe, cheese from France and elsewhere, and beer from Ireland, and you name it, those items coming in will definitely go up in price. And Trump may claim that, the companies are going to pay the price. No, those increases are going to be passed on to the consumer. So we could see, for example, the price of avocados, which I enjoy. They're not that bad right now, but they will definitely increase by 25% because we get the bulk of our avocados from Mexico, right?
Yeah,
This is just out of the question. That has nothing to do with tariffs. It's just the bird flu.
Well,
right. And Canada, apart from the immigration question, Canada is a major trading partner, not just of the United States, but Pennsylvania specifically. We export. I mean, we have extensive dealings with Canada, so that's going to have an impact on increasing on prices as well.
Gentlemen, what's the very latest on implementing these tariffs? They're announced and then they're paused. while negotiations go on. What's going on there?
Yes. The president announced maybe a couple of weeks ago that he was going to, imminently impose 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico. The Canadian and Mexican governments responded. They said, okay, we're going to be putting more emphasis on detaining immigrants from our countries. We're going to beef up forces at the border, although some would say that they had already made that commitment and they're just sort of reiterating that to make Trump happy. And so that's been delayed for a month, and negotiations are continuing. In the meantime, Trump has announced some, specific tariffs on goods, and that that not only Canada, Mexico, but from other countries such as China. But right now, the tariffs are on hold while these negotiations are going on.
Well, I noticed as this situation develops with respect to tariffs that President Trump has introduced a word, reciprocal. He wants to have reciprocal tariffs, which sounds like I implement a tariff on you, you implement a tariff on me. Have you heard about that, gentlemen?
Yeah, reciprocal, and from Trump's perspective, means there are countries that do have tariffs on goods that get imported to their countries from the United States. And so if we didn't have a tariff already on those countries' goods coming into our country, the reciprocity is he will impose tariffs on their goods coming here. But the big one that was most recently announced was the tariff on all steel and aluminum products coming into the country, right? Regardless of what country it is around the world. And that, as Fletcher noted, we bring in much of our steel and aluminum, especially aluminum, from Canada. And that will definitely drive up the cost of goods like automobiles, appliances that use aluminum. So yeah, I would expect that, but that's on a 30-day hold. I mean, he announced it. I think that's going to kick in sometime in March, but now we all hold our breath and see what will happen. Whether or not.
Of course, a little bit of the sideshow is that, especially with Canada, is that Trump has spoken about annexing Canada, and trade policy tariffs is going to be one way to induce the Canadians. I don't think it's making them love us, but nevertheless, it will induce Canada to want to become part of the United States. I don't think that's working very well so far.
If you've watched any hockey games broadcast from Canada lately, we're not very popular there.
And so as far as reciprocal tariffs are concerned, gentlemen, it seems that they could be an alternative to having a trade war. Is that the idea? Is it trying to put some water on flames?
I would say it's throwing gasoline onto the flames. Yeah, I mean, you announced tariffs, and it's ignorant of Trump to think that unilateral tariffs are going to end with a unilateral tariff. The affected country is going to impose its tariffs. Then it becomes a trade war. And does the United States increase the tariff, the percentage of the tariff on the goods coming in from that country? And then, of course, that country will either increase its tariff rate or maybe extend the tariff to a wider array of goods. All of that does nothing but drive up the cost for American consumers. And it can get very ugly, right?
Now, one thing,
it could also
go ahead,
drive
Fletcher.
It could drive the country into a recession, okay?
As far as any developments that have occurred while these tariff discussions have been going on, Mexico has said that it'll put 10,000 National Guardsmen on the border to address drug trafficking. That seemed to have been a response to this discussion about tariffs. How do you gentlemen see it?
Yeah, although there was a deal that was announced under the Biden administration last December that this was going to happen. So I don't know what Mexico has given up.
So that
and
arrangement predates the Trump administration anyway, Fletcher? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
so, so they're just saying we're going to go ahead and do what we said we're going to do.
Mhm.
It's as though Trump is trying to take credit for something that had already been agreed to. What can one say, right? And if that's all that Mexico needs to do to get out from under the tariff, there's no real penalty or pain felt by the Mexicans. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm more concerned, not the same, much more concerned, but I feel more concerned about what's going on with Canada, because there are both Mexico and Canada are huge trading partners, but Trump may be irreparably damaging our relationship with the Canadians. We have one of the longest demilitarized borders in the world with Canada. I don't see us going to war with Canada, but we don't need to invest more money in putting American uniformed personnel on the Canadian border to interdict illegals coming into Canada, which we're not getting most of our illegal immigrants coming from Canada, but as a show of force, he may be forced to do that, and it's just a waste of money. It's like,
Gentlemen, we only have about
Mexico. Yeah, go ahead.
Gentlemen, we only have about 2 minutes left on our program. Trump's tax cuts from 2017, first time he was president, are due to expire. And quickly, who benefits from those reductions and what's going to happen?
Well, most of those, most of the provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act were benefiting more affluent folks. There were cuts in corporate taxes. There were cuts in capital gains taxes. There was across the board a tax cut for Americans, which is already expired. But we're really talking about tax cuts that are aimed at the corporations and the more affluent, under the theory that these are the job creators, and somehow if they benefit, this will trickle down to the rest of the economy. This is now part of a major legislative package or packages. The president in a couple of weeks is going to give an address to Congress, presumably about the budget. The House is working on a package, the Senate on its own. And there's going to be, in essence, efforts to extend and even broaden the earlier tax cuts, at the same time accompanying them with large cuts in the federal domestic budget, and especially, I would suspect, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and all kinds of discretionary programs.
Okay, Fletcher, thanks very much. Our guests have been Fletcher McClellan, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Elizabethtown College, and Thomas Baldino, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Wilkes University. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
PCN's Ellen France talked to Representative Ann Flood about rideshare safety.
Welcome to our program. You've proposed a bill known as Sammy's Law. Who is Sammy?
Sammy is Samantha Josephson, who was a young girl, college student who had gotten into the wrong Uber, or what they thought, what she thought at the time was an Uber. It was actually not an Uber, someone posing as an Uber, and was taken and brutally assaulted and murdered.
What would your law do?
So this legislation would create barcodes that would be placed on the cars for Uber or Lyft or any transportation network provider, that then could easily be identifiable to who that driver is, what company they work for. All their credentials would be part of that barcode that any rider would be able to scan and get that information to make sure they're getting into the proper car.
What security measures are currently in place when it comes to rideshare apps?
I don't know. It's been, the problem has always been that, you know, there's many different rideshare companies going on around now, right? So there's Uber, there's Lyft, there's others, and a lot of times people come out of a restaurant or casino, or for whatever reason they're using that rideshare app for a ride to get somewhere, and you know, a lot of times they're not even looking to see if they're getting into the right car. So this security measure is just going to make sure that, you know, safety is paramount in making sure that people can ride safely and get where they're going easily.
How did this situation with Sammy come to your attention?
This is actually the third session that we've introduced this legislation. I was told about Sammy's story and Sammy's law when I first came into office back in 2021. And so I know I was told that there were other states that were doing it, and they wanted to have this legislation run here in Pennsylvania, and asked if I would take up the charge on it. So I did.
You mentioned other states having this law. What would it look like if, say, you were Ubering from a state that didn't have this legislation in place to a state that does? Would there be a difference in what your ride would look like or what your app would look like?
That I'm not sure. If you're, I mean, clearly if you're in Pennsylvania, if the law was passed here in Pennsylvania and you would get into the ride here in Pennsylvania and say you would go to New Jersey, for instance, the safety measures are in place for here in Pennsylvania, but you would be left off in New Jersey. I don't know if, you know, say that state has that measure in place, has Sammy's law in place to protect the rider from another state.
Where is this bill in the legislature right now?
Right now, just a co-sponsorship memo has gone out. I'm working with different stakeholders right now before it's introduced to make sure that we are making a very solid bill with the protection of the riders at the forefront, and also for the drivers as well, and the companies, making sure that it's a good bill and something that we can get across the line with bipartisan support.
Representative Ann Flood, thank you for your time.
Of course, thank you.
Thanks to Ellen for that interview. Before we go, a reminder about On the Issues. First, charter school accountability with the Executive Director of the Education Voters of Pennsylvania, Susan Spica. She'll join us on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Then right after that, we'll explore the governor's proposal to close 2 prisons in Pennsylvania. The guest will be the president of the PA State Corrections Officers Association, John Eckenrode. He'll be here Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.